Okay, go ahead.
All right. So, Espanol, Romance language. So Spanish is spoken all around the world. It has at least 3 million native speakers, and throughout 44 different countries it's spoken. Now this includes Mexico, Central America, South America, Africa, and Spain. Spanish originated from the Iberian Peninsula, and it was brought to America during the colonization period. Now, with 329 million speakers, it's second only to Chinese. English is a close third. But what's interesting to note about Spanish is that it's easily recognizable phonetically. So if you hear a sound, it's easy for you then to spell out a word or to understand a word. Now, as far as culture goes, there's quite a few things that the Spanish culture is known for. Now, it's not directly Spain, but its most Spanish-speaking countries share these similar cultural ideas simply because they were brought over from the Iberian Peninsula.
So bullfighting, also known as toreo in Spanish, is a traditional spectacle in Spanish-speaking countries. It not only happens in Spain, but also other Latino countries such as Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, and Ecuador. So many people think that bullfighting is a blood sport, but they regard it as a fine art and not a sport because there's no competition involved. Here we have a picture of bullfighting in the 19th century when the governments promoted bullfighting as a national symbol. So you can see there's a lot of bullfighting going on.
Okay, now as far as dance, we just showed you a picture of the flamenco, and we decided, since we did a language assignment where we broke down the language, to break down the word a little bit. So we have flama, which means flame or fire, and enco or endo, which is a suffix that means quality of or pertaining to. So if you put the two together, it's pertaining to flame or fire, and it was meant to symbolize the passion that came from the dance. Now what's also interesting is that through dance, the guitar evolved, and this was originally a 5-string instrument, which was then a 6-string instrument in the 19th century, and classical guitar actually developed coupled with the flamenco, so they grew of each other.
So Spanish architecture has a lot of influences, mainly due to its geographic location. The biggest influence was the Romans, who left their monuments in Hispania. And throughout history, they've experienced many different changes. They went through a Gothic style in the 12th century, a Renaissance architecture in the 15th century, and currently they're going through like a contemporary phase of architecture. And also, Spain has the second highest number of World Heritage sites in the world, which is recognized by the world as like important sites to be preserved. And I think Italy is first or something, but yeah.
Now getting down to the bread and butter, we have our grammar. Now we use grammar worksheets. We had about 300 different sentences. I'm sure everybody in the class is familiar, but for those outside of the class, you had to select certain sentences. In most cases, you did most of them, and try to really outline the way that your language worked. So starting with nouns, we had either masculine or feminine, and they were marked for number. So an example, libro would be book, it's masculine. It's based on the ending. It denotes whether or not it's masculine or feminine. As for pronouns, they indicate the person, number, gender, and case. Case is going to include gender right there. The subject's understood based on the context. So basically within the sentence, you'll be able to determine who the direct object is and the indirect object.
So for example, if you said hablo, you wouldn't have to say yo hablo, because based on the ending, you already know it's first person. So adjectives, they indicate gender, number, and agree with noun. So for example, if you said, John read a good book, you say, John leo un buen libro, where buen would be singular and masculine.
Agreeing with libro, which is also singular and masculine. Okay, so we also looked at demonstrative pronouns, determiners, and quantifiers in our grammar worksheet. These are all based on number, gender, and distance as well. So in Spanish, like this man, that man over there, and that man way over there would be 3 different demonstrative pronouns. And they also agree with the nouns similar to adjectives. So for example, a man walked would be un hombre caminó. So the determiner un is singular and masculine because hombre is singular and masculine. Spanish is an inflected language, which means it indicates, verbs indicate tense, aspect, mood, person, and number. And there are 3 different verb endings in Spanish, AR verbs, ER verbs, and IR verbs. And the forms are based on person and number. One of the most interesting parts of the grammar worksheet that my colleagues looked at was the use of the subjunctive tense, which is something that some of them have never heard of because it's not marked in English. So basically the subjunctive tense is used to indicate a wish or a desire that the speaker wants to or does not want to fulfill. Basically an action that has not been completed yet. So for example, John might walk would be quizás Juan camine, and the verb ending is just different. And then the subjunctive is also used in patient proposition sentences. So, for example, John wanted Mary to read a book. Again, you would use the subjunctive tense in that sentence.
So that's it for grammar. Oh, it's not it for grammar. Adverbs. Okay, so adverbs have a mente ending, and it's not used as often as in English. So you can say, like, John walked very quickly, in English, happily. And in Spanish, it's not used as much, but here it'd be Juan camino muy rápido. And that's the, see, the mente is not actually on here, even though it's quickly. Okay, that's it for grammar. Moving on to Linguist Assistant. So that's the program that we use to analyze, and really that's where we applied all the principles that we used in the class. We were trying to translate something in the language that we were assigned. So here's a screenshot of what it would generally look like on the top. It's also a little bit blurry, but that's a sentence broken up into its constituent grammatical parts. And this is what we were trying to translate. This was like our kind of end goal. It was a little bit out of reach for the time that we had, but this is what we were working on, about this girl named Melissa, and she wasn't happy because her eyes were sore. Some random things. So we start off with nouns. First we just put in a whole list of stem nouns. You can see it says the stem up there, and stem would just be like jump, like the root word in English, jump. You could add jumping or jumped. So it's just the main stem noun. We just put in a bunch of nouns that we thought we would use, and then some other common nouns. So then on to the nouns. In Spanish you have feminine and masculine nouns, unlike in English. So we had to add that on in the class and select for each noun that we put in whether it was feminine or masculine. And then it also has case. The ones that we use are pretty normal nouns that you see in the dictionary every day. So it's just nominative case for all of them. But we put that in just in case in the future to be thorough that not all nouns are nominative. Okay, so another thing that nouns have, obviously, is plurality. And in Spanish, it's fairly easy. You just add an S. So we just made a rule, add an S for every noun when it's plural. But there were some exceptions, so it's kind of hard to see with the coloring here, but there's some that are white, like obviously Maria. We didn't really do a for hospital, you could see slightly different ending. It changes with the ES on the end. So going back to the sentence that we were trying to translate, that's I, oyo, and there's no S in the end, even though in this case it should be plural. And if you actually hover over this over here, this stuff in the middle tells you that this is supposed to be plural in this sentence, and it's just not. So we had to make a rule to actually recognize that it was plural and then go into the nouns and take the plural form. So we just selected that it was plural, and then, ta-da, it's plural. There's the S at the end. The nouns.
Yeah. So the next thing that we did was pronouns. We wanted to include all of the possible pronouns that one could ever see in Spanish, of course making things more complicated. So the way to do this was we thought we could create a spell-out rule with kind of like a huge table to incorporate all of these pronouns. So what we did is I don't know if you guys can see, it's a little blurry, but in the columns we added, for example, singular first person, singular second, singular third, masculine. So we accounted for the plural, the number, the person, as well as the gender in this column. And then for the rows, we wanted to create case to be across the rows. So sorry again that it's blurry, but these are just, when we created features, we did all the cases that you would see in Spanish, so like nominative, accusative, and applied those for the rows in the pronoun table. And this is kind of what it would look like when you would double click on the column. So for example, for singular first column, we would mark the number, which would be singular, and the person, which would be first. And we also had class come over from the nouns. In terms of Spanish, for singular first person, there is no gender differences, so we didn't mark that. And there's the case again. This is just another example for plural first person feminine. So the singular with the red square around it means everything but singular, so plural. First person is marked there, and then feminine was marked. And this is kind of like our end result, what our table ended up looking like with everything filled in. The next thing that we did was verbs. The first thing that we did for verbs was we went into this, added the stems of all the verbs, which will be here, and then we added the English glosses. Now, as we mentioned before, there are three types of verbs in Spanish: AR verbs, ER verbs, and IR verbs. So we created a new feature that would show AR, ER, and IR verbs, type of verb endings. And then we also created a feature called reflexive, which would basically indicate if the verbs are reflexive or not. And then to create sort of the conjugations, the first thing that we did was first person singular. And because the endings are all the same in Spanish, we just did a simple suffix rule to add O to the end. So lo, penso. And then for the other endings, it would be a little bit different. So for example, for third person singular, as you can see, we created a more complex table to show AR, ER, and IR ending differences. This is kind of what we came up with. The white marks show that these are just irregular verbs and have stem changes and just irregularities that we manually changed. But then, in order to apply the verbs, what we did to the sentences, we had to make sure that the verb would agree with the noun. So in order to have noun-verb agreement, we created this sort of feature copying rule. And the features that we copied were the number and the person from noun to verb. So you can see like that red line from the N to the V. So before we applied it, this was the root of the verb is star, and then when we clicked OK to apply it, it worked. Estan is the correct form.
Alright, so I think the last thing we did was adjectives. So again, it's just the same as we've been doing add the stem, add the gloss, which is just means basically the translation. And then we had to add all those forms, and it's different depending on whether it's masculine singular, masculine plural, feminine singular, feminine plural. So we made a different spell out rule for each of these different situations. And this is just our table, an example of all the masculine, feminine, singular, plural, with a couple of them that are exceptions, so we had to change that in manually. I think we just picked ones that happen to have a lot of exceptions. So here we go again. This is sor elicited, and it's wrong because it doesn't have the correct ending that it's supposed to, the OS at the end. So we had to tell it again to copy the features from the noun, copy it onto the adjective, so the adjective knows that it's supposed to be, I don't know what was supposed to be in this case,
It would be plural masculine.
And so once we did that feature copy rule, it works. Very just like it's supposed to be. And I think that's as far as we got. Let me just go sorry. Yeah.
Yep.
So I mean, we covered all the basic features of the language. We didn't get it to work 100% on the one sentence, but we got to apply everything that we learned pretty much.